Raised beds have become almost a gardening religion. Ask any gardener and they'll tell you the benefits. Good drainage, neat edges, and a tidy appearance that makes the garden look professional. But here's the problem. Traditional raised beds take too much work, demand endless soil hauling, and often end up as wooden boxes of compacted dirt after a few seasons. I got tired of fighting with boards, screws, and truckloads of purchased soil. That's when I changed how I used raised beds, and this shortcut not only saved me time but transformed the way my soil behaved. My plants grew deeper roots, my watering needs dropped, and the fertility of the soil actually improved year after year without me constantly topping it off. Raised beds fail when treated like giant containers. The traditional way of building raised beds is to set up a frame, fill it with purchased garden soil, and treat it like a giant planter. The problem with this approach is that you create a confined box of imported soil that sits on top of your native ground. Over time, that soil compacts, drains poorly, and often becomes disconnected from the biology of the earth underneath. Worms and microbes don't move in easily because there's a barrier, and you end up feeding and watering constantly just to keep plants alive. So, the shortcut I found is to stop thinking of raised beds as boxes and start thinking of them as frames. Instead of trying to fill a bed with purchased soil, I now build the fertility directly in the ground under the frame using organic matter. The wooden walls are really only there to hold mulch, compost, and layers in place as they break down, not to create an isolated soil island. Layering organic matter creates a sort of natural soil factory inside the frame. Instead of hauling in cubic yards of bagged soil, I now use the lasagna-style approach right inside the raised bed. At the bottom, I lay down a thick layer of cardboard to suppress weeds and start the decomposition process. On top of that goes a layer of coarse organic material, sticks, small branches, or wood chips, which acts like a sponge for water and keeps air moving through the soil. Then I add a mix of green materials like kitchen scraps, grass clippings, or fresh weeds, followed by brown materials like dried leaves, shredded paper, or straw. By alternating greens and browns in roughly a 2-to-1 ratio, I create the perfect carbon-to-nitrogen balance for decomposition. The bed becomes a living compost system, breaking down over time into rich, crumbly humus. I finish with a top layer of finished compost or good topsoil, just enough to plant into. As the layers decay, worms move in, tunnels form, and the entire raised bed essentially builds its own soil from the inside out. One of the biggest problems with traditional raised beds is how quickly they dry out. Because they sit above ground, moisture drains out and evaporates fast, forcing constant watering. By filling the bed with layered organic matter, I've created a built-in sponge that soaks up rainfall and releases it slowly to plant roots. The coarse material at the bottom prevents compaction, and the decomposing layers create air pockets that roots love. For example, I planted tomatoes in a shortcut bed built in spring using layered organic matter. By midsummer, I noticed that even during a week of hot weather, the soil stayed moist several inches down while the traditional filled bed next to it needed water every other day. The shortcut not only cut my watering in half but gave the plants a more stable environment to thrive in. Another advantage of this method is that fertility compounds over time. In a traditional bed, you start with purchased soil and constantly have to add compost, fertilizer, or amendments to keep it productive. But in this shortcut system, the raised bed is fed from the bottom up as organic matter breaks down. Every season, the bed gets richer, darker, and looser because you're essentially running a compost system underneath your crops. At the end of each season, I top off the bed with another round of leaves, grass, and kitchen scraps, then cap it with a thin layer of compost. By spring, the material has decomposed into fresh soil, ready for planting again. After 3 years of doing this, my beds are so fertile that I barely add anything except water and mulch during the growing season. This shortcut saves time, money, and energy compared to the old method. Traditional raised beds often require hundreds of dollars worth of purchased soil and amendments, not to mention the labor of hauling it in. My shortcut bypasses that completely. Instead of buying, I use what's already available: leaves, branches, grass clippings, food scraps, and paper waste. Not only is it cheaper, but it also keeps nutrients cycling on site instead of being hauled off to landfills. Even better, the shortcut requires less digging and less maintenance. Once the initial layers are set up, nature does the heavy lifting. Worms, fungi, and microbes break everything down while I simply keep the surface mulched and add scraps as they come. The result is a raised bed system that costs almost nothing, takes little effort, and gets better with age instead of worse. Raised beds don't have to be expensive boxes filled with lifeless soil that dries out and demands constant feeding. By rethinking them as frames for organic matter, you can turn each bed into a living soil factory that retains water, feeds itself, and improves year after year. The shortcut is simple: layer what you have, let biology take over, and stop treating raised beds like giant planters. If you want your raised beds to produce abundantly without exhausting your time, money, or energy, give this method a try. It's a proven shortcut that turns hard work into smart work. And if this guide has been helpful, don't forget to subscribe to Hydrohaven and share it with other gardeners who are ready to transform their raised beds into thriving, self-sustaining systems.